In recent years, sympathetic representation of characters of mental illness in popular TV and film have become more prevalent, and this can certainly improve the lives of real people with mental illnesses. With this increase in representation, stigma surrounding depressive and anxiety-related disorders has seen a significant decrease in the last 20 years. Unfortunately, this trend of increased representation and decreased stigma of mental health is not equally beneficial for all mental illnesses. The stigma associated with dissociative identity disorder is seen to have either not changed or indeed worsened over the same time period. So why is this the case? Dissociative identity disorder, previously known as multiple personality disorder, is a dissociative developmental disorder caused by repeated trauma in early childhood between the ages of 1 to 6. Due to the repeated trauma and a lack of consistent reassurance from a caregiver, the typical process of a child's development is disrupted. In early development, a typical child's behaviours and experiences integrate and coordinate over time to create a stable sense of self and their single personality. In a child with DID, this process is disrupted by the repeated trauma, and the child is unable to form this stable sense of self between their behavioural states and experiences. Instead, a DID individual forms multiple self-states with amnesia barriers, confining certain traumas, experiences, and skills to different self-states, or alters. Despite DID being an uncommon mental health condition, it has been disproportionately represented in film, often as the main subject matter, like in Three Faces of Eve, Sybil, and Frankie and Alice, or it's used as a plot device in films such as Fight Club, Me, Myself and Irene, Identity, and most recently, Split. Unfortunately, most of these films often show a melodramatic, inaccurate version of the disorder, and there is a common trend of the character of DID having a dangerous, violent, or murderous evil alter. Eve strangles her baby in Three Faces of Eve, Hank hurts children and rapes the girlfriend in Me, Myself and Irene. All the characters in Identity turn out to be the alters of a man charged with murder, and the system in Split kidnaps 3 underage girls and has an evil alter who turns into a monster that can climb walls. All of these examples contribute to the stereotype of the dangerous DID individual and the evil alter, creating stigma around the disorder. But do these negative representations have any truth behind them? In 1977, William Stanley Milligan was the first person in the US to be found not guilty by reason of insanity due to multiple personality disorder. Milligan had been charged with the kidnapping, rape, and robbery of multiple women around the Ohio campus area. He reportedly had 10 alters, one of which, Adelena, was found to be the culprit, causing Billy to wake up in a cell without any knowledge of the offence. This case can be seen as a real example of this evil alter stereotype that we commonly see in film. Later, in 2007, Doris Neely, a 50-year-old woman who had been in treatment for years for her DID, committed 2 acts of arson and attempted burglary, one at a stranger's occupied home and another at her former therapist's home and stables. Doris, like Milligan, attempted to plead not guilty by reason of insanity due to her DID. After multiple psychiatric interviews and evaluations for the case, it became clear that Doris and her alters were exaggerating their disorder to manipulate a better outcome to the offences. Doris, who was found to have premeditated the acts of arson, was taking advantage of people's sympathy and would purposely bring out a child-identifying alter whenever asked difficult questions to avoid answering them. In this case, there is no one evil alter to blame for the destructive offences. Instead, the system as a whole was equally responsible for their actions and the manipulation and malingering that followed them. These 2 cases are real instances where the individual with DID has been found to have dangerous tendencies and causing harm to others. But studies show that Billy and Doris are not a representation of most people with this diagnosis. A recent study of 173 people with DID found that in the last 6 months, 3% had a legal charge, 1.2% received a criminal justice mental health referral, and only 0.6% had been incarcerated. These statistics suggest that people with DID are about as likely to commit crimes as the average person. Mental health practitioners also suggest that people with DID are much more likely to hurt themselves rather than other people, and are more susceptible to re-victimization like others with a history of abuse. Despite criminality and violent tendencies in DID individuals being so uncommon, perhaps such cases as Billy and Doris, when publicised, are much more likely to be remembered by the public due to the rarity and intrigue surrounding the disorder. But does representation really matter if it's fiction? The media we consume can shape our perception of the world around us and the groups of people that we may not come in contact with in day-to-day life. Repeated, similar representation of these non-dominant groups in society creates a stereotype, usually one which is highly caricatured and potentially based on cultural prejudices. To change these negative stereotypical perceptions of non-dominant groups such as those of DID, positive counter-stereotypical portrayals must be represented in the media, something that movies like Split fail to do. In response to the criticisms of the 2016 film Split, people might retort that it's obviously not real, it's a supervillain movie. And social scientists do suggest that when exemplars are judged to be atypical, fictional, or less believable, they are less effective in changing group perceptions. So, due to the supernatural elements in the film, people should recognise the fictional nature of the piece and therefore not include this representation to their own idea of DID. But since Split continues the already established stereotypes of the DID individual being dangerous and/or having an evil alter, the viewer may only take the supernatural parts with a pinch of salt, while retaining the other negative associations of the disorder. Research also suggests that such stereotypes and perceptions of mental health disorders can inhibit individuals from seeking treatment and receiving the correct diagnosis. Over-exaggerated portrayals of DID can make people question whether they really have the disorder. When interviewed, a man diagnosed with DID said, "I didn't think I had DID. I'd occasionally asked, I'd occasionally wondered, and I thought, well, no, that can't be because I'm married and I've got a responsible job, so someone would have noticed." Due to internalized stigma, people facing this diagnosis can also become scared of what this might mean. Another DID individual stated, "The first time I heard about DID was through Identity and Split, and I was terrified of it. When I was first diagnosed with it, the first thing that crossed my mind was, oh God, I'm going to hurt someone." It becomes clear that these representations of DID in fictional media can have harmful and lasting effects on not just the public perceptions of the disorder, but the treatment and recovery of those who have it. Even clinicians and practitioners of psychology are found to base their understanding of DID from the media, due to a distinct lack of training for dissociative disorders. Because of widespread repercussion like these, filmmakers and content creators should be mindful of the representations included in their work and the real-world effects they might have. And perhaps they should question whether the genre or fictional nature of the film really gives them that free pass to run wild with a concept without researching it first. Hopefully, with these things in mind, filmmakers of the future can cultivate more accurate and sympathetic portrayals of vulnerable and non-dominant groups, like those of DID.